Hi guys, Alec, Peirce, Tech Tips, Scuba Tech Tips. So here I am. Hang on a minute, this is not working. Sorry, Kev. You stay over there, okay? Now, obviously, if you're watching me, you know what this tip is all about already. All right, two things. Basically, hygiene. But I want to talk about two things very quickly about hygiene if you're a scuba diver. Now, chances are right at this moment, because right at this moment, there's not a whole lot of travel going on in North America. In fact, there's not much travel going on around the world. And you know what I'm talking about. We're in the middle of what they call a pandemic. I'm not too sure what that means, but apparently a lot of people are getting sick, and many, many people are dying too. It's not good news. So everybody's being very careful to protect themselves from any kind of germs, virus, bacteria, whatever is not good. Well, how do you do that if you're a scuba diver? How do you make sure that you're not going to get sick? How do you ensure personal hygiene of you as scuba diver and your gear? Well, that's two things. Let's talk about just regular scuba diving. Let's assume that it's a regular day, say 6 months a year ago, or 6 months a year from now when everything is settled out again, and you and your buddies decide to go scuba diving. So you go into your local dive store and you rent your gear. Right off the bat, you can see where the issue is. You're renting equipment. Renting equipment by its very nature means that somebody else has been using it. That's right. And now you're going to use it. And then you're going to give it to somebody else. That's what gear rental is all about. So point one, get your own gear. If you are going to be an active diver, and you really ought to have your own equipment. There are many, many reasons for this, and I've dealt with some of them in the past. You get to know the gear, you get to choose what you want, you're the only one using it, all those. There's lots of reasons why you should have your own gear. But this is perhaps an opportunity for you to revisit that issue. Many people say, well, I don't dive enough. I don't want to spend the money. Fair enough. I'm into that. What do I mean by an active diver? If you are diving or intend to dive, honestly intend to dive, don't say I hope to, but if you I'm going to dive 12 times a year, once a month on average, 12 times a year. You're going to dive 12 times a year and get your own gear. Now, why do I say 12 times a year? Well, first of all, 12 times a year is pretty active. You'd be surprised. Many, many, many certified scuba divers who've been certified sometimes for many years don't dive 12 times a year. Well, they make a couple of dives at the cottage in the summer, and then in the wintertime, they usually go away for 1 week. They go to Mexico or South Pacific or someplace for 1 week for a nice holiday down south, maybe Florida, whatever, and they make a couple dives down there. So they do 3, 4, 5 dives in a year, and that's great. You know, they enjoy scuba diving and so on. But for that many dives, really financially, economically, it doesn't make much sense to purchase. But if you're making 12 dives a year or intend to make 12 dives a year, then you really ought to have your own gear, because what that means is in 2 years, you've bought it anyway. That's right. At current rental rates and current retail cost of scuba equipment, which, by the way, is pretty reasonable right now, if you rent the equipment 12 times a year, over 2 years, you have paid the same amount as if you had bought the equipment. Work it out. Go to your local dive store and talk to the nice man behind the counter. Hopefully he's a nice man behind the counter. And say, hey, listen, I've been and work out the numbers. And I think you're going to find that I'm pretty close. So that means you own it in 2 years. Well, since scuba gear within reason lasts literally forever, forever, I'm still using equipment that's 20, 30, 40 years old. You know, it should be upgraded more often than that, but you don't need to. Well, now the investment, the economic reality of it is very simple. Buy the darn stuff. And again, use that 10, 12 dives a year as a guideline. However, you are still renting. So you go into the dive store and say, I want to rent equipment, but you're concerned. You're concerned about a variety of things. The most important thing is somebody else has been using this. Now you're going to put it in your mouth, you're going to blow, and then you're going to suck. Think about this for just 1 minute. If you think this is a non-issue, when you have the regulator in your mouth, you blow into it. You usually blow pretty hard, certainly if you're trying to clear water. Sometimes you can cough underwater, no problem at all. So whatever you have in your throat and your lungs, your throat, your lungs, your nose, your nasal cavities, and so on, goes into there. That's right. And the guy before you did the same thing. Yeah, think about it for just a minute. It's not very pleasant. Now, even if they're not sick, they still have a lot of germs, and there may be germs that you don't want. Well, you don't want germs in you. So think about that. It's not very pleasant. We occasionally, as service people, open a second stage to clean it, and it's not very pretty. We almost always, these gloves aren't just to protect us from the current situation, but we wear gloves as well when we service equipment. Guess what? We're not afraid of getting plastic on our hands. No, no, no. When we open this, sometimes what we find inside is not very pleasant. Okay? So that's the thing that makes you think. So check with your diet. How do you keep the gear clean? I want to rent equipment from you, but I don't want to get a cold. I don't want to get the flu. I don't want to get the virus or whatever. How do you clean your equipment? And if it's a good dive store, a decent dive store, they will have some kind of a regimen set up to do that. Their training equipment and the rental equipment will be cleaned after every use. Every use. Not once a week, but after every user. Many dive stores, proper dive stores, the ones I used to own and run, they would have right beside the training pool and in the rental room, they would have a large vat, a tub, if you like, filled with disinfectant solution, marked very clearly. And then they would have right beside it another vat with clear rinse water. And these were changed regularly. That is, disinfectant was changed regularly, not as often. The fresh water was changed very often. And then the regulators, what they would do is they would, at the end of each training session, or when the regulators came in from rentals, they would take the second stages. They didn't bother to disinfect the first stages or the gauges. There was no need to. No need. Nothing ever goes in. But the whole second stage would hang down in that vat. And they would hang on the side just like that. It worked perfectly. You could have a dozen hanging around the disinfectant vat for a minimum of 30 minutes, 1/2 hour in disinfectant. This disinfectant was very simple, chlorine. No matter what form it was in, maybe sodium hydroxide or some other form of chlorine. We used to use pool tablets, which are very, very strong, chlorine. So 30 minutes was more than anything in. We shake them up and down and make sure that disinfectant got all through the second stage. Hang them in there for 30 minutes. And then they would take them and we put them in to rinse and rinse all that off because you don't want to breathe or swallow or even taste that chlorine stuff. So now that reg would then be hung up and ready for reuse and perfectly safe. Everything in there is going to be dead. Anything was in there is going to be perfectly clean for you to use. But not every dive store is necessarily as conscientious. Now you also need to be concerned about one other part, and that's the buoyancy compensator. Because on the buoyancy compensator, there's this thing called the oral inflator. What? Oral. That's right. Your mouth. Exactly. So that oral inflator, which may have a power inflator on it, is often inflated by some divers. A lot of divers still they still use the oral inflation aspect of that power inflate. You don't really need to anymore. Shouldn't need to anyway, but a lot of divers still do. So that should also be disinfected in the same way. That's normal operation. What's the third thing? We talked about the regulator and the BC. What's the third thing? The wetsuit. Maybe you're still renting a wetsuit. Okay, lots of people do, particularly if you're traveling and you don't take a wetsuit with you. Particularly if you're traveling into a cold area where the wetsuit that you're going to need for diving in that area is one of the thick suits or maybe a dry suit. You don't own one because you live in a warm area and you don't want to travel with it because it's very, very heavy, so you may rent. Once again, you need to be certain that the dive store you're renting from has taken great care to make sure it is clean. At most dive stores, when the suit comes in from rental or from use, it's brought in inside out. We used to tell our divers, when you take the suit off after your weekend of diving, because you take a wetsuit off, you peel it inside out to get it off, leave it inside out. There was a reason for that. They would come in, and then we would disinfect them with a spray. That's right. The whole suit on the inside was completely sprayed with a similar disinfectant, and then rinsed once again, allowed to dry, then turned right side out, and hung up to be reused. But I hesitate to tell you this, a lot of dive stores are not quite that fastidious. Keep that in mind when you go to rent. Now, if you own your own equipment, it makes a big, big difference. However, you still should disinfect it, keep it clean. And there are so many ways to do that. There actually are some products. There's a product called Sтерosol. This product right here, Sterosol. Now, this is a shop size, a dive store size. Cleans, conditions, and deodorizes scuba mouthpieces. So this is safe, to use on the equipment, I guess that's a bit of a concern. More importantly, if it's rinsed, which it should be afterwards, but there is a little bit left, it's not going to harm you, the diver. So this is specifically made for scuba equipment. Now this also comes in a little wee, I don't have one here, a little wee spray bottle about this size and maybe an inch in diameter with a little spray top on it. You can easily tuck it into your dive bag or your dive master kit and use that. On the mouthpiece mainly, squirt it right inside the mouthpiece. Lots of it, spray it all around, squirt it all around and clean it, let it sit. And then if you want to give it a rinse, that's a good idea as well. So that's one thing you can do. If you don't have access to or don't want to buy Stericycle, there are lots of things on the market. You can buy 1,001 different types of spray. There's Lysol spray, Microban spray. This is what we're using currently because apparently this works really, really well for the current issue we have in the world and the virus that's going around. You can get that same type of stuff in wipes. And wipes are pretty handy actually. You know, they come in a tube like this, you pull one out like so, and they're damp. They're like little, you've seen these, they're like little rags, and they're wet. They actually drip, they're so wet. And you can use that to wipe your hands, wipe your equipment down inside the mouthpiece, wipe the BC, whatever it happens to be. Now this is your own equipment we're talking about right now. This should still be done with your own equipment. Let me ask you this. You scuba divers out there, you own your own equipment. When is the last time that you disinfected it? Geez, you're probably saying, you can't remember. In fact, you probably, many of you are saying, I never have. Maybe it's something worth thinking about. Huh? Remember what I said earlier, that we sometimes get scuba gear coming into the dive store. Looks nice. Outside it's nice and shiny. You shine the outside, right? And you rinsed it and clean it off. Oh, that was good. Bring it to the dive store. The serviceman opens up the second stage and I should show you the pictures. He takes off the diaphragm and there's that little room in there. Warm, wet, that you've been spitting and coughing and hacking and breathing into. Yeah, sometimes it's not very pretty. So keep that in the back of your mind. General hygiene. Two things. If you're renting, check with the dive store. Actually ask them to see how they keep the equipment clean. It's your health. And if you own your own equipment, get some wet wipes, there's all kinds of them, alcohol, whatever works for you, and make sure that even your own equipment is disinfected. If you're storing it for a long time, a great idea. You do not want the equipment stored in a warm, moist place without something to kill some of the germs in there. Anyway, just some thoughts. It seemed appropriate right now as we're kind of dealing with a fairly serious problem around the world and wearing protective equipment. All of a sudden you start thinking, my gosh, everything I touch, I go to the grocery store or the hardware store, everything I touch, I want to be careful I don't pick up anything. And then you go scuba diving. You put it in your mouth. Yeah, it makes you think a little bit, doesn't it? Anyway, maybe there's some ideas in there. Maybe it's something that'll get you to get your own gear out, take a quick look at it and clean it, put gloves on, and clean as we do, clean it and disinfect it, and you'll feel a lot better. And you'll feel a lot better, if you understand what I mean. Anyway, there's some tips in there for you guys. Alec Peirce, glad to be back at a dive store. It's been a little while, and I hope this tip had a little bit of information in there that might be valuable to you. Talk to you soon again. Alec Peirce, Tech Tips.